Hello, everyone. Just wanted to say hi there. We'll get started in just one moment. We'll see if anyone else would like to join. Okay, wonderful. We'll get going. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Stephanie Stewart, and I'm the Manager of Community Transportation for Grey County. Together, Bruce, Dufferin, Grey, and Wellington counties, in partnership with Saugeen Mobility, are currently collaborating on a regional transit study. To support this initiative, the project partners have engaged Dillon Consulting to lead the study. Before we begin today's session, if you have any accessibility requirements we can support you with during today's presentation, please note them in the chat so we can better support you. If you would like any of today's materials in an accessible format, please reach out to me and we will ensure that you are provided with the format that you need. On behalf of the project team, thank you for joining us today to learn more about rural transit. I'll now turn it over to Dennis Carr from Dillon Consulting, who will lead us through today's session. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending today's session. This is the second session that we've conducted for councillors within the 4 counties. So if you have already attended the first session, this will be a sort of a second viewing of the first one I did. And if you haven't, then we really appreciate you being here today. As Stephanie mentioned, my name is Dennis Carr. I'm a partner at Dillon Consulting, and I've been in the industry for about 23 years with a focus on transit planning for communities of all sizes across Canada. So we've been engaged to conduct this regional transit study on behalf of the 4 counties and also SMART. And what we're trying to assess right now is trying to get a better understanding of the overall need for transit and identify options moving forward. But today's session is not about that. Today's session is providing a brief overview about, the good, the bad, the ugly of transit in a rural context. So as we go through this, I want to try to present all sides of the coin, including understanding, the need for transit, why it's important in rural communities, as well as some of the challenges of implementing transit in rural communities. So it gives you a better understanding of what you need to know when you make future decisions. So with that, I'll just move on. I've got a presentation that will last about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll sort of turn it over. If anybody has any questions or comments about the presentation, we're happy to answer them. Before I begin, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that we are joining together virtually from across Ontario, which is the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, Cree, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Métis people. We also acknowledge the treaties that cover these lands and the responsibilities they carry for all of us today. Since we are not all in the same place, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on the lands that you are on and the responsibilities we each share in reconciliation and respect. Okay, so in terms of today's workshop agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the purpose of the regional transit study that we're undertaking, so you'll have a good background of it. We'll talk about the benefits of transit in your community, what transit options exist today within the 4 counties, the mobility gaps and challenges of operating transit in rural areas, the types and levels of service that we're going to be looking at, typical costs, funding, integration, and governance, and then we'll sort of get into some discussion. So in terms of the purpose of our study, the study this initiative has been split into two phases. And the first phase is the study where we're here to design and assess the feasibility of a unified regional transit network across all 4 counties. And when we're doing this, we're going to be looking at the type and level of service that's suitable for this broad region, what the passenger fare strategy and cost structure should look like, opportunities to integrate with existing transit services, primarily looking at local transit that's in place and some of the community transportation options that are available, whether coordinating efforts and sharing resources such as vehicles, technology, and administrative functions will create greater efficiencies and improve customer service, with the focus on creating a seamless passenger experience, and also next steps for implementation. A big part of this is engagement. We really want to understand through the public how the public currently gets around, what they think about a unified regional transit network and what it should look like, what are their priorities when designing a network. And priorities are important because when we are doing a design of any sort of system, there's only a certain limited amount of funding that's available. So we have to understand, where do we invest in that funding that's going to benefit the most people? Transit can't be everything to everybody, so we need to find out what our priorities are if we have a limited amount of funding. And what's working well today within the existing transit services that are available. We're going to gather this feedback through various approaches. So we've had a community survey on for a number of weeks now, and I'm happy to report that we've almost reached 4,000 responses across all 4 counties. So that's a significant amount of feedback and participation from members of your communities. We're engaging in focus groups and stakeholder meetings, and as part of an employer focus group, we're going to be issuing an employer survey to better understand what needs of employers are. And then we've had a number of public meetings and community events, including in-person public open house and a virtual public open house. So all of this engagement will help ensure that the plan reflects the needs of residents across all 4 counties. In terms of our overall schedule, we started this project back in October. We've been doing a lot of background review and our initial round of engagement to date, and we're going to start drafting up the plan probably starting tomorrow, gathering all the feedback that we've sort of received from the various different engagement channels and the data that we reviewed. We'll then go to a second round of engagement and bring it to each of the county councils to get their initial feedback on what a draft plan will look like. We'll then go to the public from there, make any revisions that are necessary to the plan based on the feedback that we received, and then it gets presented to each of the county councils along with the SMART board for a final decision in May about moving forward. If a decision is made to move forward with the implementation of the plan, then we move on to phase 2, which we've received partial operating funding through the Ontario Transit Investment Fund, which will fund up to 50% of the operating cost of this over the next 4 years. So that gives us some initial seed funding to sort of get this project going and to identify how we can make it sustainable over the long term. Okay, so that's a little bit about the project and what we're trying to undertake. So I'll now move on to discussing some of the benefits of transit in your community or in a rural community. So why is transit important? As a transit planner, when we're designing a system, we're typically designing to achieve several different outcomes: equity and access, environment, economy, and efficiency. And I'll go through all 4 in a little bit more detail. In terms of the benefits of transit from an equity lens, the introduction of transit services in your community will help improve access to those with limited options. It's also critical to support independent living and aging in place, aligned with sort of many of your strategies that you have on aging at home and aging in place and supporting seniors in your community. So it really provides that access to important healthcare, reducing socialization, access to goods and services that seniors need to age in place, particularly when they start losing the ability to drive or just simply feel uncomfortable driving at night or during inclement weather conditions. It can improve mobility options for youth. So when we move to rural communities, the ability to participate in after-school activities, uh, um, part-time jobs can become limited if you don't live in a community that has those transportation options, and parents then become chauffeurs, right? So that ability to provide youth an option to get around, to participate, is one of the benefits that it provides. It can provide better access to jobs and education. So as employment starts to grow within each of the four counties, and employers are looking for sort of a broader labor market, and there's that increased competition to access jobs, the ability to get to some of these places of employment not only benefits uh, the individual who is looking to be employed, but also the county as a whole from an economic development lens, and supports areas with limited transportation options. So again, there's lots of benefits to transit. I've on the side here, I've sort of identified some sort of local stats that are sort of relevant to support this. This is just the sampling. We do know that within Grey and Bruce, about 26% of the population are seniors. So it's a significantly above the provincial average. So there's an aging community that requires that level of support. Dufferin County Strategic Plan also focuses on expanding opportunities to access healthcare services. And one of the other things is, from an equity lens or an affordability lens, the cost to own and operate a vehicle is about $10,000 a year, and that's significant, particularly when we're experiencing an affordability crisis. And it's not always about, can I live car free? But can I reduce the number of cars in my household? So as your children age and you have two cars in your family, do you need to add a third? Do you need to add a fourth? Right? Or can you live with one less car in your household to increase the affordability of living in your community? In terms of economic benefit, transit will provide visitors and residents with more access to businesses. So a number of the counties sort of have high rates of tourism. So if there's shuttle buses or private buses that will bring people from the Greater Toronto area, to some of these sort of visitor attractions, how do we sort of get around the region once you arrive? There's the employment market for those supporting visitor activity as well. So it can help people access these tourism spots as well as spots within the local economy. I mentioned before, it will help support part-time jobs for students and also helps with the attraction of businesses to your counties. So, just as a key stat, we know that Grey County expects to add over 8,500 jobs by 2046. And I'm sure there are similar stats within the other three counties as well in terms of what that job growth is going to look like. So the ability to attract those employers is partially depending on being able to access a broader labor pool. It also supports growth, and growing populations create a higher demand for transit, particularly focus on urban centers within each county, and also a higher need to address local traffic and downtown parking issues. So even if your growth is sort of focused on sort of urban settlement areas, there's still a need to travel between urban settlement areas because not all the goods and services that one needs to access is always available within the settlement or area that they live in. So we see high rates of growth within these four counties, ranging from 32% growth by 2051 to 49%. And with this growth, many of them are newcomers that come from other countries where transit is available, even within more rural communities. And so the expectation is there to have some form of mobility option to get around and support that growing population. Other factors, of course, on the environmental side, can we reduce our carbon footprint by introducing more sustainable modes? And this is not just about operating green transit fleets, but also about if we can get more people in a vehicle, it reduces the carbon footprint than a single occupant vehicle traveling alone. So identifying that environmental benefit of having transit in place. It can also help reduce congestion reduction, particularly in high demand destinations. to special events or peak seasons when there's let's say a lot of visitors that are coming to your county, and can reduce parking requirements. We know of a couple of sort of downtown areas that attract a lot of business, a lot of tourists that have a lot of parking issues, and having that shuttle bus in place or that option for people to get to that downtown area can reduce that demand for overall parking. So lots of different benefits of transit within your community. Now, in terms of what's here today to sort of fulfill those needs and demands, that's sort of the next section of what I want to talk about, including where gaps exist. So within these 4 counties, we know that there's a need for long distance travel. Rural residents often require travel outside their community to access services, places of employment, education, and medical appointments. So many of the sort of smaller settlement areas don't have a lot that someone can walk to or cycle to, and requires the use of a car or another form of mobility option. And if that vehicle doesn't exist, whether it's just temporary because one person in the household has taken it to work and left the other person in the household without access to a vehicle, transit helps to fill that need, which is accessing services and goods and employment opportunities that are not available in one's local community. This typically translates into longer travel times, which can be difficult in a winter night and can result in many cross-municipal and cross-county trips because not all the destinations that people go to are near a resident's home. So what we do know is that based on Census Canada stats, that 11 to 36% of commuters travel over 45 minutes to get to work within the 4 counties, and that 22 and 51% travel outside their county of residence to work. So that's just for work trips, demonstrating the need for people who are traveling longer distance and crossing county boundaries, and it sort of suggests that need to have that unified system that connects the 4 counties together. Of course, there are challenges of rural transit, and we're fully aware of the fact that the majority of people that live in rural areas have a car and use it for work. We know that 84 to 87% of drivers have a car or use a car. And I'm gonna, in a couple of these slides, you'll notice reference to Guelph, and we just for the sake of comparison, we use the municipality, an urban municipality that is close by to the 4 counties, just to sort of provide that frame of reference or that comparison. So we know that there's a higher proportion of people that drive. We know that there's a much fewer proportion of people that currently take transit, and that's partially because the transit network is not as available, but also because the density is not in place to provide the same level of service to attract more riders as you would in an urban community. We know that, but we also know that there's a growing number of people that cannot drive. Seniors that lose their license prefer not to drive at night or in the winter. Youth that don't have a license or are delayed getting a car due to the high cost of insurance, and residents that can't afford a first or second car in the household because of the high cost. And we know that as well, the population is growing. So while the market is smaller, there's also a growing need, and we fully recognize that and the challenges. In terms of the existing mobility options that exist, they are quite limited. Within the 4 counties, we've got 3 municipalities that provide a local transit service. Owen Sound provides service to the town of Blue Mountains, and Orangeville Transit also has a service in place. Sorry, my mistake. Owen Sound has a transit service, and Coltrans provides a service to the town of Blue Mountains. We also know that there's intercommunity service that is in place. So we have the Guelph Owen Sound transit route that operates a couple of trips a day between Owen Sound through Wellington County and into Guelph, connecting into a couple of the sort of settlement areas along the Highway 6 corridor. And Grey Transit route also operates an intercommunity service between Dundalk, Shelburne, and Orangeville. providing those connections. And those have been in place through previous provincial grants that continue to currently run, and we've seen sort of that growing ridership since they've been implemented. Wellington County also provides a county-wide on-demand service. This is a service that's well utilized. However, it's capped due to the limited vehicle supply across the service area. So one of the challenges it can become difficult to get a ride when you need it, because each vehicle has to accommodate sort of longer trip distances to get to where they need to go. In addition to this, we have specialized transit services that are provided by Meaford Moves within Meaford. And we have a number of sort of community agencies such as Saugeen Mobility and Regional Transit that provide community transportation for seniors and persons with disabilities. There's also carpooling in place within Bruce County, which coordinates a smart commute program that allows people that are going to the same destination to share a ride, and several for-profit private carriers that also provide intercommunity service to and from the GTA. But however, this is not really suitable for everyday travel. So those are the existing options that are in place. And while it does provide some option, it does leave gaps in service and service levels. So this is just a slide that shows the communities that have without access to a conventional transit service. So if you're not eligible to ride a specialized transit service, this would be for other individuals. And you can see it covers a broad area across the 4 counties. Within Wellington County, while everybody does have access, there's limited capacity across the 4 counties. So to summarize these overall gaps, we have a couple key points. One is the corridor effect. And in Grey and Dufferin, transit is limited to major highways, 10, 89, and 26, leaving communities that are a kilometer or more off the main road completely unserved. Bruce County, we have a gap. Despite having major employment hubs such as Bruce Power and tourism, Bruce County has no year-round public transit system connecting its communities. Wellington has a model in place and currently has 100% geographic coverage through the RideWell service, which operates Monday to Friday. However, as I mentioned, the limited number of vehicles makes the service unreliable, and the GHOST corridor, that interregional corridor that operates along Highway 6, does not run at the times of the day that are convenient to Wellington residents and are not always well connected with the RideWell service. And SMART, as a provider, is currently focused on seniors and persons with disabilities. This actually leaves a potential opportunity to integrate with all passengers, but we need to make sure that it does not reduce the level of service for its target clients. One of the other challenges is that while services are in place, they're not integrated. So while steps have been taken to integrate services, there are potential improvements that could occur. So what we're seeing right now is passengers may need to pay double fares between local and intercommunity services. So if I'm Owen Sound Transit and I want to take the GHOST corridor, I'm paying 2 fares. On-demand and community transportation services are not integrated with intercommunity routes. And so one of the potential opportunities is if you take an on-demand service and you shorten the trips it takes and connect it to an intercommunity route, then that leaves those on-demand vehicles to make shorter trips, which improves their overall availability. And right now they're not integrated. So we've got 2 parallel services that potentially are making long distance trips at the same time. Fares are not consistent across the 4 counties. Schedules do not always meet the needs of passengers for long distance trips. Services are not searchable on trip planning tools. So if I want to sort of book a ride and I go to Google, if I want to look up a ride and I go to Google, not all the services that are in place to be able to do that. And accessibility features are not always consistent between 2 services. So these are some potential challenges that we're facing and some potential opportunities for future integration. One of the big other challenges of rural transit is density. Low density means that there are few people in close proximity to a transit route. It also spreads out, the spread out nature of rural areas also makes it difficult to group people together. And transit, really, when you gain those efficiency gains through transit, it's about, gathering groups of people closer to a stop and providing that shared ride experience. That increases the potential revenue that offsets the overall operating cost. So you can see here on the graph below, and again, using Guelph as an example, the significant density difference between the 4 counties and the city of Guelph, which again makes transit a difficult proposition. It doesn't make it an impossible proposition. It just means we have to cater the service models to reflect the reality of the environment that we're operating in. We also know that many roads do not have pedestrian infrastructure, which makes it difficult to get a stop, and many of the county roads have high speeds and are not suitable to stop a bus, and that key destinations often require long travel time. So these are all the challenges that we're facing when we're implementing it, and we are aware of them. And when we sort of design a system, we take that into account. Just building off that, just another sort of key stat comparing rural systems to urban systems is we know from the previous example that the sort of cost per kilometer may be higher in a rural area because you have to travel longer distances. But that also makes I mentioned before with the low density, the average rides per hour and rides per capita can also be far less than an urban system. So again, it just creates a challenge in implementing transit because we can't be quite as efficient as if we're operating in a high density urban system. But again, it doesn't take away from the need. And the one message I want to leave you with is that in rural counties, we understand that transit is not required by as many residents. We know that the majority, more people than in your urban counterparts have access to a vehicle. And sort of have chosen to drive. But we also know that that for those who need mobility, they really need it. So if I live in an urban area and I don't have access to a vehicle, I can walk, I can cycle, I can take a taxi to get to my destination. If I live in a rural area and I don't have access to a vehicle, it becomes that much harder to access the destinations that I need to access. So that need is much greater for those who have limited mobility options in a rural area. So understanding the need, understanding the gaps, how do we make a case for transit and what are the options that we're going to consider? Sorry, Stephanie, you had your hand up.
That's okay. I just wanted to flag a question that I received in the chat just before you get too far ahead
Sure,
on more
yeah.
slides. One of the questions was, is that density per kilometer squared? So I think you maybe have to go back 2 slides when you're talking about density per kilometer.
I believe it is, but I will get back to you on that one. I did look it up from Census Canada in terms of the population over the overall area of the counties. So
Wonderful.
yeah, that's a stat directly from StatsCan.
Great, thank you. And I can follow up with that person in the chat at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, as I said before, when I present this, I want to present I don't want to just present the rosy picture. I want to present some of the challenges of operating transit because these are things that you need to understand. But again, just re-emphasizing there is that need, and that need is growing with population growth, and recognizing that there's that sort of challenge in how do we operate it. So making the case for transit and what are the service options that are available. When we're identifying the feasibility of transit and designing a service, there's a couple questions that we need to ask. The first is, what are the mobility objectives in your community, right? And so we want to better understand sort of what's your vision, what are your goals? Are you a community that's focused on aging in place? Are you a community that's focused on reducing your sort of greenhouse gas emissions? Are you community focused on growth? What is that vision? What do you want to be as a community? We need to understand that. Who are your target passengers, right? So, are we targeting seniors that want to get to, medical appointments and and shopping and keep them aging in place? Are we targeting workers, trying to attract economic development? What are we trying to accomplish? And that has a influence on the type of transit service that we designed. What kind of trips are you hoping to accommodate? Again, based on who your target passengers are, helps us understand that. And then what days of week and hours are needed to accommodate those types of trips. So if we're targeting work trips, we want to make sure that it's, at least 5 days a week, and someone can get to the start of their shift and come home at the end of their shift. So in terms of answering the first question, we sort of did a quick review of the official plan policy within each of the 4 counties to identify what are some of the common themes that were identified within each of the counties. And the common themes that came out of it were equity and well-being, sustainability, and growth management. So these are some of the things that sort of came out of our initial policy review. And as we sort of dwell further into it, we'll need to understand how that transit system aligns with it. As we go through this, there are a number of myths and truths about transit that I want to sort of talk a little bit about. The first one is that there's a one-size-fits-all solution for transit, and that is certainly a myth. Because land use is harder to change, we need to adapt transit to make it fit the market and the geography better. So as we go through this, we'll identify a couple of different models that we're going to consider to service a rural community, particularly for inter-community trips. But certainly we try to adapt the transit model to fit the community. The other one we hear often, and this is typically where existing services exist, is diverting a fixed route is easy. So sometimes we'll get requests to say, hey, you have a fixed route that's in place, and if you can just deviate because we want to pick up somebody else who lives a couple kilometers away. And that's sometimes easier said than done. Every time you divert a route, you may be increasing the length of the ride for people that are already on the bus. So we always have to compare, is there a benefit in diverting that route to pick up a couple of other passengers? And how much are we inconveniencing people that are already on the route that we're adding to their travel time? And what's the cost benefit of doing? It can lead to schedule adherence issues and potentially misconnections. So every time we deviate, if we're trying to connect to a transferring point, we may miss that potential connection. Or it could reduce the frequency unless we're adding service. So we're lengthening it, and unless we're increasing that overall length, we might have to reduce that overall frequency of service by deviating that, because we want to maintain the same resources. So in terms of the options that are available within rural areas, I'll go through a few. The first is on-demand transit, and the example here is RideWell. So on-demand transit is a shared ride service that does not operate on a fixed route or schedule. It operates within a predefined service area and or a period where passengers must book a pickup using either a mobile app or by calling in. Now, on the back end, software is used to optimize ride sharing using the most direct trip. So if 2 residents call in and one wants to be picked up at 9 and one wants to be picked up at 9:15, and they live close to each other, it will optimize that trip. So it'll pick up resident 1, and then instead of going to their destination, it will deviate to pick up passenger 2 and then drop them off at their destinations, assuming they're in a similar area. So it looks for those shared ride opportunities, but not always following a fixed schedule or route. Passengers can be picked up at fixed stops or virtual stops. So we may identify, please meet at this corner, or if there's no available sidewalk infrastructure at the curb of your home, and it's best suited for low demand areas or periods or to accommodate rural service. And fares are variable and typically distance based. So the other option that we're going to look at is fixed route transit. And so this is the traditional transit service that you typically seen, the one that's operating with Ghost, Owen Sound Transit, Orangeville Transit. And this is where passengers are required to walk or roll to and from a fixed route stop. That route operates in a predefined schedule. Let's say it's every hour, every half hour on a predefined route without any deviation to that route. So it doesn't matter who's on the bus, it's always following that same route on that same schedule. This is best suited for high demand urban areas or periods, as well as a long distance trip connecting urban areas together and not suitable for large rural areas where there's no predefined sort of urban areas or destinations. Then we have specialized transit and community transportation. And this is open to eligible residents that are able to use a fixed route or on-demand or conventional on-demand service. So it's based on a person's disability will prevent them from using a conventional service. So here, the individual would receive a door-to-door service. And if it was integrated with on-demand, we could commingle the two, whereas the person without a disability would receive a door-to-hub or transfer maybe to a fixed route, and the person with a disability who cannot use an accessible fixed route would see a full door-to-door service where they need to go within the service area. And again, this is a requirement to ensure that it's available wherever conventional transit services operated. And finally, we have ride sharing and carpooling. So the example is Smart Commute in Bruce County and carpool apps such as RideShark. So this is where someone will go on an app, see if they can find a match for someone that's going to their same destination around the same time that lives near them. They come to an agreement to share a ride with that individual going to that same location, and they get a trip. So this is a great low-cost, affordable solution, but it's not always reliable. For example, if the driver is sick one day and can't accommodate that trip, what does the passenger do? And it's not reliable if I can't find a carpool match or a partner. So in terms of a summary of the type of services, I think I've gone through all of this in terms of the suitable operating environments for each of these, but also what you can expect in terms of a typical ridership. So fixed route is where you get your highest amount of ridership per hour of service because it's focused on urban areas and connecting urban settlement areas together. So where you have that higher concentration of people. When you get into on-demand, you're getting at a lower boardings per hour just because people are spread out a little bit more in the environments in which on-demand typically operates in. One thing to note is as we sort of go through these, we must be cognizant of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act through the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation to make sure that we address the requirements for transportation service providers in Ontario. So through this, we have to understand that disabilities can take many forms and can impact individuals differently. And as we age, the propensity to develop a disability increases. So anything that we do, we want to make sure that there are accessible vehicles in place, accessible options, and that we have a parallel service that can accommodate the needs equitably of persons with disabilities who are unable to use a conventional service. And at the end of the day, making systems accessible are good for all passengers. So to summarize, there are minimum standards that we need to meet to ensure that we're able to provide a service that meets people's needs. But there's also a difference between needs and desires. So there's certain things that are required to ensure that a service is usable, and these are our needs. You know, a passenger must have access to a service within a 5 to 10 minute walk or some sort of connected system. It must be available on the days and the weeks and hours of when they want to travel. If I can get to work, but that system stops running when I'm getting home, that system is no longer usable for me. It needs to be accessible for all, including persons with disabilities, but also connections with active transportation infrastructure, such as sidewalks. It must be easy to navigate. So I must be able to understand how to use the system. It has to be affordable. So if I'm taking transit to work and my fare costs more than 1 to 2 hour wage, is it worth taking? It must be safe, at least in terms of having trained drivers feeling secure on board the vehicle. And from a municipal perspective, it must be effective with operating budget is financially sustainable for the municipality. Add to this, we have desires. So this is the needs. The desires are, how do we attract more people to the system once we accommodate their needs? And this is about creating services that are frequent, where travel times are relatively comparative to the automobile, where there's good customer service, good culture of transit within your community, and there's an equitable system in place for with the same type of level of service for anybody in your community or the ability to access. So difference between needs and desires. And as I mentioned before, there's priorities that we need to identify and balance, right? Because we may have a certain amount of funding available that we want to put towards a transit system. And we may say we want to meet all of these needs and all of these desires of the community to get as many people using it. But that obviously comes at a cost. So as we go through this process, we need to understand, what are your priorities? Do we want, do we want to focus on coverage, right? So taking a resource and spreading it across the entire 4 counties. But what that may do is it may disperse that resource where it's not as frequent, it's not as direct, it's not as available. Or we can take that same resource and focus it on connecting just the urban corridors. And that may allow for higher degrees of higher frequency and reduced travel time, but it doesn't provide that coverage across all 4 counties that we identified before. So those are the trade-offs that we have to understand. And part of our job in doing that is connecting with members of the public to identify what their priorities are when designing a transit system, so that we can design it in a way that meets their needs. Level of service must also match demand. So this is sort of an important consideration. Daytime is the typical time that transit operates. It's great for providing trips to more 9-to-5 jobs, things like that, but it does not provide service for evening workers or evening outings. So if your priorities are part-time after-school activities, or making sure that if people are going out and have a couple too many drinks, they have a safe alternative home, the priority is extending that service into the evening, and we need to understand that. So it just takes that resource and spreads it out a little bit. If we're accommodating work trips, we need to ensure that we're at least operating 5 days a week to accommodate that standard weekday work trip. If we want more shift work or part-time jobs or tourism and weekend demand, we might want to look into 7-day-a-week transit or operating at least on Saturdays. Understanding that weekend demand decreases, but having transit on weekends also provides another trip purpose that may not be able to accommodate it during the week. So there's different durations, and we need to understand, based on what we want the transit system to accomplish, it translates into how much service that we need to put in place. One of the things I want to get into, and of course, many of you heard this, transit will not pay for itself. Will pay for itself, and of course, that's a myth. There's always a municipal investment required to run a transit system, and this sort of occurs universally. But I would say that this is the same as the investment that you may make into roads, into libraries, into sports facilities, into parks. These are all investments that municipalities make into their communities to provide a benefit for your residents. So I tend to think of transit as a means to provide your residents with access to the other services and facilities that you also invest in. So when you're trying to sort of determine your priorities, how much does transit, benefit your computer, whether you use it or not? Because at some point in our lives, we may not have the ability to drive, and having that option in place is always a benefit for members of your community. Another thing that we hear a lot is that smaller vehicles will always save money. So one of the things that we hear is, well, in order to reduce your costs, just purchase a smaller vehicle, and that should work. So when we look at all the different components that make up a transit or operating a transit service, there's your plant maintenance, so where the vehicles are stored and repaired, your fuel, the people that run the system, your vehicle maintenance. But the biggest cost of running a system is the driver, right? So even if we reduce the size of the vehicle, that which may in turn reduce the amount of fuel consumption, that's not going to be a significant cost reduction. So what we tend to do is we tend to right size the vehicle based on a number of other factors, including fulfilling peak demand to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind. And that may mean during off periods that bus may be less full, but that's okay because we're accommodating based on what that peak demand is. And then purchasing vehicles based on, the overall maintenance, consistency among the fleet, ability to get parts, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of things go into vehicle size. This slide talks a little bit about sort of key performance indicators and things that you can expect. And it really just puts in numbers some of the things that I was talking about before. So you can see here, comparing sort of a typical rural county transit, and we've used some examples in Simcoe County, Norfolk County, Brant County, and District of Muskoka, and comparing it once again to Guelph, just because it's an urban system of a similar size. So you can see the sort of the difference in density, the service hours per capita. So the level of investment is obviously much higher in an urban system, reflecting the increased density and that sort of need for transit than you would see in a rural system. The ridership per capita, as I've discussed before, is lower, as well as the boardings per hour. But then when you sort of get into and because of that, your net cost per passenger is going to be higher to get each passenger, but your cost per capita or per resident, as you can see, there's a sort of a vast difference in terms of the level of investment that's put in an urban system with a population that size versus a rural system. And again, how that translates into the revenue cost ratio, which is the percentage of the operating costs that's collected from passenger fares compared to that hourly operating cost. That ranges between 10 to 25% in sort of rural county systems. And then Guelph, as that comparison, was about 41%. So just some stats for sort of you to be aware of that shows the difference between rural and urban. There's also capital costs that are required. So the vehicles itself, which can be purchased or leased. And within rural transit, you can use small buses, while urban transit typically uses large 40-foot buses. The facility, transit stops and stations, intelligent information technology, such as Farebox, CAD-AVL, et cetera. These are all different components of the system. This doesn't mean that the municipality has to go out and purchase all of this. If it chooses to, there are a number of capital, sort of provincial and federal funds available that typically focus on capital that can offset your capital costs. But if you're contracting out the service to a private operator, many times they will include the capital, including identifying a place to store and maintain vehicles as part of their overall contract cost. So if that's not something that you want to do, then there's the ability to have the operator provide that. In terms of typical revenue sources, passenger fare revenue typically gets about 10 to 25% of the operating cost, depending on how you sort of price your fares. There's the Ontario provincial gas tax that's available that can only be used for non-pilot services and not to exceed 75% of municipal spending on transit, including fares. So it's not meant to be a replacement of municipal investment. It's helped to support municipal investment in transit. And that's determined through a combination of, what's the available pot of gas tax funding available, and your population and your ridership. And you get allocated a certain amount from the provincial gas tax program. It's important to note that provincial gas tax, every resident contributes to that every time they fill up their car, but the municipality only receives it if they have a transit service in place. Otherwise, it gets spread out to other municipalities with transit service. There's the Rural Transit Solutions Fund, which can provide funding from capital. That's a federal program. There's development charges that you can use to fund growth-related capital only. So if your municipality is growing and you want to purchase capital, it's that concept of growth, paying for growth. If that growth is contributing to that need for transit, that charge could pay for part of it. Advertising, which is fairly minimal, but still a small revenue source. And of course, the Ontario Transit Investment Fund, which is the grant that's supporting this study and the future transit service that will have to be decided. In terms of setting passenger fares, as I mentioned before, passenger revenue will only cover a small portion of operating costs. And again, no different than any other municipal service, such as libraries and recreation facilities, which receive very low revenue from user fees. The majority is funded through the tax levy. And so the important thing to do is to consider that balanced need of affordability and cost recovery. So we have to understand sort of what's the right fare to charge to make it usable, affordable, while still gaining some cost recovery. A number of systems or a number of municipalities have started to explore the concept of fare-free transit, and sort of what does it mean to just eliminate the overall fees for transit altogether and make it a free service so people get around. And it certainly does add to ridership growth. We've sort of seen that. But just one of the considerations is that if you ever want to grow and expand your system, then that just takes away from a revenue source that's available to grow and expand and provide a better level of service for the people that are using it. So again, when you're setting fares, you can look at concessions based on age, so having lower fares for students and seniors, or you can base that on income, recognizing that not all seniors have affordability issues, but also think about, how much what's the cost of minimum wage and how much it's going to cost to travel to a job, and is it worth me taking transit if it's going to take up an hour or two of my salary to take transit? Okay, I want to sort of finalize this presentation before we get into discussion a little bit about integration and governance. So why unified transit? So it's a big question. Why are we doing this study? Unifying transit creates a seamless passenger experience for all components of that trip, including trip booking and planning, limiting the number of transfers, creating a consistent eligibility for specialized transit, consistency in fares. So as a car driver, when you're crossing a boundary, you'll see a sign that says you're now entering another municipality, but that's it. The roads don't change. They're the same road. You don't have to pay a different fare to enter that municipality. So it's the same concept with transit. The more we can create that seamless passenger experience when you're crossing that boundary, the more that system will be used. It helps to identify efficiencies through collaboration and taking advantage of unallocated resources. So rather than having 4 separate contracts for a technology provider, can we consolidate it into one? There's a spare ratio for transit vehicles, meaning I have to have a certain number of spare vehicles to accommodate if a peak vehicle breaks down, that I have another vehicle to take its place. So under a unified system, I can reduce the number of spare vehicles I need because of that sort of economies of scale, which could reduce the overall cost of the service. And it also creates a unified voice for funding from senior levels of government. So for those of you who are at the Roma conference and talking about transit and the importance of it, it creates that sort of unified voice about the importance of it in rural communities and getting that funding that's available. This is just sort of talking a little bit about the benefits of integrated governance, having integrated systems. So just a few more examples. Again, from both a governing body or an operating perspective, along with the passenger perspective. So from a passenger, again, simpler passenger experience, one source of information for trip planning. I don't need to go into multiple websites to plan a trip. Faster, stress-free transfers. It's more affordable, improved access to key destinations because I'm not forcing a transfer to cross a boundary when my destination is just a couple kilometers away. I'm just taking you right to that key destination. And improved accessibility. From a governance body, optimize efficient resources, increased revenue potential with increased ridership, reduced planning duplication, fewer duplicated roles and staff, shared infrastructure, maintenance services, greater access to external funding. So lots of benefits from both perspectives. So as we go through this, we're going to look at a couple of different governance models about how we operate the transit service within that unified framework. And each sort of balance the level of local autonomy of decision making versus that sort of desire for integration. So the first model looks at regional cooperation. This is where each partner works together voluntarily to enhance integration, led by one of the parties. And each partner that joins a consortium operates transit service independently, but there's an agreement in place to work together to achieve common goals. So there's a benefit in that model. One of the challenges is that cooperation does not always occur and it's more difficult to achieve. There's shared service delivery, where there's a single operator and technology provider with services agreed to up front. Each partner makes planning decisions about their own service, including setting on budgets. So has a bit of that local autonomy, but because you have one common operator, can lead to higher levels of service integration. And finally, there's a transit commission where there's a centralized decision-making structure, planning, service, maintenance under a single entity that reports to each body, creates a high level of integration and allows the commission to make decisions that benefit the entire region, not just individual municipalities, with individual municipalities being represented as part of the board. So lots of different models that we're going to sort of explore as we go through this. And we go through this, we want to ask a couple of questions: who makes decisions, plans the service, who operates and delivers and maintains vehicles, who owns and has responsibility over assets, and who funds the service. These are all decisions or questions that form part of that governance structure. And when we do this, we want to make sure that there's good principles of good governance that are in place, including the ability to deliver your regional vision, public transportation, representation and voice, and that's reflective of the population being served, transparency and accountability, provides that clarity to the decision-making process, including accountability of decision makers and constituents they represent, the efficiency, enables cost-efficient processes and allows timely decisions, and customer focus, enables decisions that focus on the customer journey, regardless of municipal boundaries that passengers cross to reach their destination. So to finalize, just some things to consider as you sort of think about unified transit and the benefits. Growth management, reducing growing traffic congestion, improving commute times. It can help support aging in place by supporting access to shopping, medical appointments, reduce socialization, affordability, providing an affordable transportation option, and reduce the percentage of income on housing, engaging youth by increasing their independence and access to after-school activities, environmental sustainability with greenhouse gas reduction, economic development, supporting businesses that are looking to locate in your community, employment, supporting access to employment and training, road safety to achieve Vision Zero, providing safe alternative to travel, and making sure those regional connections are in place, including to the GO network. So these are some of those benefits and things to consider as we sort of move forward. In terms of next steps, as I said, we have that community survey. It's live. It's going to close early next week. We've already received close to 4,000 responses to date. And we're currently in the process of completing a number of focus groups and stakeholder meetings, including with employers, seniors, youth, social services, Indigenous communities. So we're wrapping up sort of that first round of engagement. Our next step is to assess the mobility gap, develop a transit plan, calculate the financial plan, review the governance models, identify next steps for implementation. And once we understand all that, we'll conduct a second round of engagement with the public and councils and the SMART board, and finalize the recommendations and report to each of the councils and the SMART board. So I think I've talked long enough. Hopefully this was beneficial to you to provide a sort of a better understanding about how transit systems are operated in rural communities. Now I want to sort of pause and see if there's any clarifying questions about what was presented here today. So I will turn that over to Stephanie, who's going to sort of facilitate that discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dennis. That was great. One of the questions, and I'm hoping you can clarify, is the goal to enhance current programs or to replace programs that are currently in place?
When you say programs, maybe just a point of clarification, do you mean the transit systems or?
The question doesn't say, but I'm going to make the assumption that they are talking about transit programs.
Yeah, so the goal isn't to replace existing transit services. It's to sort of help support. So we have a couple of local services that are in place. We're not replacing them. But what we may do is look for ways for an intercommunity service to better connect to those local services. So it provides that first mile, last mile connection, right? In terms of the specialized services that are in place, and there's community transportation, there's specific specialized transit services. Again, this is about finding opportunities to support each other. Are there resources that are underutilized that we can help, create more trips through a partnership model? So again, not replacing, they're there. There's a need. How do we sort of enhance?
Great, thank you. I mean, kind of further to that, how can you kind of just elaborate a bit on how systems like this or regional transits can connect into medical transportation services?
In some cases, like we're not going to replace medical transportation services because many medical transportation services require a higher degree of assistance from the operator, right? So there is the um, community transportation providers that are in place that will provide that sort of door through door, what I call door through door service that may help someone wait for them while they're at the medical appointment, because in many cases it's difficult for them to get back and they require that direct trip back without the potential to share a ride. So there's the opportunity for us to provide some medical trips, like to appointments and things like that, but on the realm of public transit, where it's always going to be, there's an opportunity for shared ride, and the level of assistance to get from your door into the vehicle to your appointment is not there as much as you would see in community transportation.
Perfect, thank you. I'll just leave for just one moment if anyone else wants to add any more clarifying questions. I don't have anything currently in the chat or in the Q&A. One individual did ask for us to share the link for the survey. So I've included that in the chat. If anyone would like to promote it, that would be great. More responses are always better. I just have another question, so I'm going to take a moment to read it. So there's just a reference made to the previous trolley system that used to exist in Saugeen Shores and how it kind of ended up morphing into a transit system over time because people learned about it, and it wasn't the original intention, but it ended up being greatly successful. It ended up being discontinued due to insurance and driver availability. So do you have any comments or experience where you could chat about kind of how we could work through or navigate those challenges of securing drivers in rural areas and navigating different insurances?
Yeah, typically, that you can identify through sort of an appropriate contract. There's lots of private operators available that are, have the capability of doing that if you want to contract that out. Or you can take it in-house and identify what the sort of appropriate model is if you want to operate it on your own. That's something I think we have to look into a little bit further to see what's sort of the best option to move forward with.
Great, thank you.
Certainly something we can overcome.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just reading a question here, just one second. So one of the questions is there the possibility to reintroduce routes along previous corridors where we had service and it discontinued due to funding being reduced. And at this time, I can take that question for you, Dennis. At this time, we're not quite sure what the final plan will be. We'll have a better idea of what the proposed plan will be when we come back to everybody in March. So we're not able to kind of comment on the future of this system today, as we're not sure what the results will be. So we're collecting all that information, and we'll get back to everybody soon as to what possible options we could see in the future. So one question, Dennis, and I don't know, obviously there will be some nuances based off of the survey, or sorry, not the survey, the service level that we operate in varying geographies, but what kind of driver's licenses do people typically need to operate a vehicle?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the type of. I don't have it on offhand, but the larger the vehicle, obviously, there's a sort of an increased driver's license that you require. If you're just driving sort of a van or something like that, it's sort of a more standard license. But we definitely look into that when we consult with our legal team to make sure that's identified based on the type of service and vehicle that's provided.
And in your experience, do you see a correlation to a higher requirement for a driver's license equaling a higher hourly wage, or is it typically the hourly wage is standard regardless of the vehicle you drive?
I would imagine there's a slightly higher hourly wage when it comes to a more specialized driver's license because it's a higher level of training that's required.
Thank you. Just kind of another question, and again, talking to your experiences and how you've maybe navigated these tough challenges in other places. How have you approached, or how could you recommend us approaching, our taxi cabs and existing services like that often feel threatened or are a little bit upset when services like this maybe come in? So do you have any suggestions or recommendations on how we could include them or things like that?
Yeah, certainly this is not meant to replace the taxi industry, right? The taxi industry, like having a viable taxi industry in place within sort of counties is very important. But taxis aren't used for everyday travel, right? They're simply too expensive to do that. And so if someone wants sort of that very direct ride to get them to their destination when they need to get there, then that taxi is still the most viable option for them. And with a public transit system, there's going to be a higher travel time, a need to share rides. It may not go when you want to go, right? So that more affordable fare that builds into it sort of that level of service that you're getting. So we're not here to replace, we're here to provide sort of those important trips that people need to make if they can't afford a taxi, typically regular trips, and benefiting from the fact that that taxi is still there to accommodate those higher priority trips, more direct trips, or trips that get taken when the transit service is not operating. So we want to make sure that they work in unison together and complement each other.
Great. Thank you. I'll just pause for a second to see if there's any other questions that anyone has. I don't have any currently in the chat or in the Q&A. Oh, one more comment, just 1 second. While we just wait for that, I will kind of circle around just to let all of you know that there will be a counselor survey coming out very soon, in the next 24 hours. So stay tuned, check your emails for that. In addition to, we'll send out the slides from today and the recording of today's session, so you can refer back to it if you'd like. But that survey will also provide you an opportunity to share your feedback that you've heard from your constituents, ask any questions that we weren't able to answer today. And if you have questions that you would like to see answered in our March presentation, please include them in that survey so that way we can come prepared and be ready to answer them for you. So it was just a comment that was made about our Mennonite and our Amish communities, just recognizing that they have some of their own ride sharing programs that go through word of mouth, and that they do employ neighbors and friends to drive them around, just as an alternative. And yes, that is very true. We've actually had some great connections through our engagement over the last few months, connecting with our Amish and Mennonite communities. So we have many paper copies of surveys completed by them, and their responses will be definitely considered in our overall planning. Okay. Dennis, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close out?
No, that's it. I just, again, want to thank you for your time here today. Hopefully you found this useful. And just as a key piece of information that you'll consider when talking about rural transit. And I appreciate your time today.
Likewise, thank you so much, Dennis, for all your great work on this. And thank you all for attending today. As mentioned, we will be following up with some emails later with the survey, this link to this presentation today. And if you have any questions or concerns, or you feel like there's somebody that I should connect with, please let me know. Again, my name is Stephanie Stewart, and you can email myself or any members of the project team, and we'd be happy to connect with you or some constituents. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you.